Meet Amy. Amy is a blob 8 pixels wide and 20 pixels tall. Amy represents a young girl who probably loves long walks on the beach and a quiet evening with a good book. I wouldn't know, because most of my time spent with Amy looked like this. I'm the Talking Skull, and I'd like to discuss the psychological principle with which Faith, the Unholy Trinity's developer, trains your mind to see what he wants you to see. Faith is a low-budget project, created over a pretty short time frame by a solo developer while holding down a day job. Unlike so many indie success stories, Airdorf's Mason Smith did not quit his job to crunch 24/7 for years on his dream game. Instead, he had a simple goal and used what free time he had to make that goal a reality. Aesthetically, that meant hyper stripped down visuals, styled after Oregon Trail of all things, and reminiscent of Intellivision games like Tron Deadly Disc. While some of these low-fidelity visuals certainly come across as creepy, it can be difficult to use them for the kind of high-impact scenes that underpin a horror game's scariest moments. Luckily, Mason had another idea. These rotoscoped shots make up all of Faith's most terrifying scenes, and they maintain a relatively low-budget look that's still within reach of a project like Faith. However, even these take much more time to produce than Faith's normal visuals, requiring frame-by-frame redrawn animation for shots lasting several seconds, with as many as 120 drawings for a single shot.
On average, each rotoscope scene would involve 75 to 120 drawings.
Developing an entire game in this style would be a Herculean task, not to mention the design constraints it would impose. So, instead, Faith saves these comparatively high-fidelity shots for the moments where they'll have the most impact. Generally, this follows pretty predictable pacing. Cutscenes punctuate important bosses, plot beats, and big scares. However, there's one important aspect of their placement that's crucial for this whole effect to work. A psychological principle used in graphic design, called the Gestalt Law of Closure. The Gestalt Law of Closure says that whenever we look at an incomplete image, our mind automatically tries to fill in the missing details and form a cohesive whole. We're all big pattern matching algorithms, so when we look at an image like this, we see it as a circle instead of just a bunch of lines. Usually, this refers to us taking complicated arrangements of disconnected images and seeing them as a cohesive whole. However, it also applies anytime we fill in extra details that aren't actually present in the image we're looking at. This is how we interpret Amy's white pixels as eyes, even though that's, not what eyes look like. And we assume she has hands and feet, even though those are totally missing. To facilitate these mental leaps, Faith's developer pushed the minimalism of his pixel graphics as far as they could go. Airdorf crafted Faith's art with the philosophy of adding only the bare minimum detail necessary for players to understand what they're looking at, and no more, even going so far as to remove details from already completed assets if they weren't abstract enough.
With images so minimalist, it was a challenge to not, what I call, overproduce certain objects and environments. Oftentimes I would go back and actually take pixels out and take details out of a sprite or a scene that I had created.
It's important to strike a balance when using the law of closure. The difference between a totally unrecognizable shape and a subtly horrifying implication can be as small as a few pixels. But the mind's autocomplete is as faulty as every other form of autocomplete, and it sometimes gets things wrong, invents things from whole cloth, or misses patterns it should have caught. Horror often uses this to its advantage by presenting incomplete images and allowing our minds to fill in the gaps with whatever we're most scared will happen. Even Faith utilizes this approach at times, but usually Faith moves in the opposite direction. The first time you see Amy, she looks like this. Thanks to that first impression, every time you see this amorphous mass of pixels, your mind's eye sees something very different. Faith uses its high-fidelity cutscenes to show you what you're meant to be envisioning when those ambiguous sprites appear. Eventually, Faith uses these scenes to teach you the aesthetic, style, and themes of the game, training you to interpret even entirely new blocky buddies exactly how the developer imagines them, without having to render costly cutscenes for all of them. At times, Faith even subverts these instincts, setting you up to see horrors lurking in unremarkable shapes, or including details that contradict your normal expectations. After all, we know that Amy has a face because she's depicted as human. We can extrapolate from there to understand that, yes, obviously she has a face. It would be crazy to assume otherwise, right? Faith's use of the law of closure puts players in the mindset of interpreting its simple graphics from word one, and means that scenes meant to terrify the player can be bare bones and goofy, because even the slightest hint of implied monstrosity sticks in the player's mind and becomes horrifying, as we mentally build our idea of it based on context and on earlier high-fidelity cutscenes. Amy may not look like much, but to me, she's one of the most iconic horror game antagonists of all time. If you haven't yet, I highly recommend playing Faith, if for no other reason than because I want to see what more Erdorf can do given the time and resources. And if you've got a favorite example of this effect, let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching to the end. You might be interested in my previous video about survival horror and the illusion of difficulty. As a bonus, here's the trailer for a found footage horror project I worked on recently. Check the description for a link to the full video.